Welcome to the Businesstalk podcast. I'm your host Deepak from India. Today we have the privilege of welcoming Dr. Ted London as our distinguished guest on the podcast. Professor Ted London is the Ford Motor Company clinical professor at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business, where he also served as area chair for business administration for 5 years. Professor Ted is an internationally recognized authority on how business strategy can drive poverty alleviation and sustainable growth. His research focuses on designing strategies that enable companies to achieve scalable impact in base of the pyramid, that is low income markets. Over the past 25 years, he has published numerous articles, reports, and teaching cases, served on advisory boards, and shared his work at leading global forums. Beyond academia, he has advised dozens of leadership teams across corporate, non-profit, and development sectors. His award-winning book, The Base of the Pyramid Promise, Building Businesses with Impact and Scale, distills his decades of research and field experience into practical frameworks and tools for managers pursuing inclusive business growth. Dr. London's contributions have earned him recognition as an Espin Institute Faculty Pioneer, the Pace Prize for Course Development, the Victor Bernard Teaching Award for Excellence in Teaching at the Ross School of Business, and the J. Frank Yates Diversity and Inclusion Teaching Excellence Award for his commitment to addressing global poverty and inequality. Before joining the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business, Dr. Ted served on the faculty at the University of North Carolina, where he earned his PhD in strategic management. His career also includes senior management roles across 3 continents, adding a global perspective to his academic and advisory work. In today's episode, Dr. Ted London discusses key insights from his acclaimed book, The Base of the Pyramid, Promise Building Businesses with Impact and Scale. Let's not keep you waiting. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ted London to the conversation. Dr. Ted, thank you for joining us. It's really an honor and have you with us today on Business Talk.
Deepak, it's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me to join you today.
Thank you, Professor. Professor, your book opens by reframing the question from is there a fortune at the bottom of the pyramid to how can we do this better? How has that question evolved over 25 years of working in the base of the pyramid markets, and what does better really mean today for enterprises and for low income communities?
That's a great lead-off question. The base of the pyramid domain started about 25 years ago at the turn of the century with an idea centered on finding a fortune at the base of the pyramid, which was really about, to large measure, companies looking where they hadn't looked before, which is the base of the pyramid, the majority of the world. And for those, who are not so clear, that is often defined as people making less than $8 a day. And that constitutes somewhere between 4 to 5 billion people on this planet. And the idea was that this was an untapped market where companies could both make money and do well at the same point. The big challenge became with the fortune finding approach that companies were looking for something that already existed. And they were often, when we talked about at the base of the pyramid, finding a fortune at the base of the pyramid, that also involved taking a group of people and turning them into a place, almost objectifying them. And what has evolved since, and quite a bit has evolved over the last 25 years. And if you follow the domain, you'll see that early work was amazing, but it's been built upon and updated significantly since then. And one of these transitions is it's moved to the idea of creating a fortune with the base of the pyramid. And that has two important aspects that we'll talk more about later, I suspect. One is the creating side, which means sometimes it's not what's there, but what we can innovate, what we can create. Can we create markets that don't already exist? And then it's with the base of the pyramid so that we recognize the base of the pyramid as a critical and perhaps, and probably, I would say for sure, the most important stakeholder in these kinds of enterprises.
Professor, you differentiate between fortune finding and fortune creating strategies in the base of the pyramid markets. Could you unpack the distinction and share an example of an enterprise that successfully shifted from fortune finding to genuinely fortune creating?
Sure, it's a great question. Let's talk about, let's say, microinsurance for farmers. And this would be an example that we did some work with some partners in Ethiopia. And the idea is if we said we're fortune finding, we would have sent our really smart, hardworking people out in the field and say, okay, tell me how big the microfinance, I'm sorry, the microinsurance industry is for smallholder farmers, and then how much of that could we capture? And when they would return, the answer would be there is no market. It doesn't really exist. So there's no fortune to be found. And if you had adopted the fortune finding perspective, you would have said, okay, well, let's potentially explore somewhere else or something else. The alternative, which was adopted by and often was led a lot by Oxfam early on with partners like Swiss Re and Niala Insurance in Ethiopia, was to say, it's not about finding a fortune, it's about creating something. So, how can we create a market for microinsurance? And that involved quite a lot of work. And typically, microinsurance doesn't have a supply issue. There are ways of providing insurance. The challenge was demand. How do we get farmers to really understand the value proposition? How can we co-create this market with them? And they did that. And we could talk about more details, but that whole idea of microinsurance for farmers is now scaled and it's been embraced by the World Food Organization. And now it's in many, many countries across Africa with enormous benefits to farmers because they are faced with a lot of risks. And this can eliminate one and allows them to invest more. And if you'd like, I could go into a little more detail about how that particular model works.
Professor, the book argues that building better the base of the pyramid enterprises requires integrating three components: real world enterprise experience, a supportive market ecosystem, and the voices of the poor. In practice, where do leaders most often fall short among these three, and how can they correct that?
Yeah, that's to some degree, this is the idea, the big idea and the premise behind the book I wrote, the Base of the Pyramid Promise. I have been doing this kind of work for several decades. And what I was increasingly seeing was that enterprise leaders were making the same mistakes over and over. And I come from I'm at a business, a well-regarded business school, and we have amazing students, and we teach them both our MBAs and our undergrads how to use different tools and frameworks to make businesses work better that serve the wealthy. And there isn't the complementary set of frameworks for businesses that are trying to serve the less wealthy. And that's what this book was really all about, was how do we build tools, frameworks, strategies based on best practices, based on the idea that we know what we have some sense now over the years of what's driving success, what's leading to failure. We need to be able to codify that. While we can't guarantee enterprise success, I don't know that anyone could ever really do that in any market. What we can do is increase the likelihood of success. And that for me was the next big step in the base of the pyramid domain to provide a set of tools, framework, strategies that would allow BoP enterprise leaders to increase their likelihood of success. And that's the heart of this book.
Professor, you introduced the base of the pyramid impact enterprises as businesses that must be both financially sustainable and poverty alleviating at scale. How do you advise leaders to navigate tensions when financial returns and social impact seem to be pulling in different directions?
Yeah, that's always a great question. And to some degree, it suggests maybe we're not thinking about this right. Because now we've created an either or. We have to get one or the other. And for enterprises like this to work, it has to be both. And what we need to not think about is should we be prioritizing economic returns or should we be prioritizing social returns? Is how do we build a business model that allows us to achieve both? And if we don't, and we're stuck in the world of trade-offs, it's very, very difficult to scale a trade-off. So if enterprises are finding themselves in this space, they need to rethink their model. And there are lots of opportunities to do that. They could be having, a model that serves higher income segments and a different model that serves lower income segments. They have to be thoughtful about the type of capital that they're accessing, not only the amount and from who, but also the time frame and the patients attached to this. Everything has to be lined up well. And again, this is all addressed in much more detail in the book, but we've got to be sure we're asking the right question. And it's not, should we prioritize financial or should we prioritize social impact? Because now we're stuck in a trade-off. It's rather, how can we create business models that allow us to achieve the returns that all of our stakeholders desire? And while it's an easy question to say, it is difficult to implement, but that becomes the right focus for the enterprise. Think about how can we actually achieve this? And with that model in place, you can then scale and avoid the trade-offs.
Professor, a big focus of the book is on building for scale and your three scaling strategies: co-creation, innovation, and embedding. For entrepreneurs listening, what are one or two common scaling mistakes you see in the base of pyramid ventures? And how does CIE lens help them avoid those traps?
Yeah, that's the essence of the of success in some degree of scale. So small is beautiful, we know that. But if we really want to have models that serve billions of people, we also have to consider scale. And that's the focus of this book. It's not meant as an either or, that scaling is the one and only way, but that's the focus of this work. And to understand scale, you have to understand the steps. As you said, it's about, innovation. It's about kind of invention and kind of beginning to get started, envisioning the venture. It's about innovation and piloting, and then it's about sustainability at scale. And in each one, there are several key factors. So I'll mention one for each. In the kind of earliest stages of designing and envisioning the enterprise, you have to embrace the idea of co-creation with the base of the pyramid. It's a marketplace that few business leaders truly understand. And in most cases, when you enter a new market, you spend a lot of time engaging with your potential customers. In low-income markets, there's often a hubris that we actually know what they want. Therefore, we don't have to do that. And that simply doesn't work. It's faster that way, but it often leads to failure. So one is you have to truly understand how to co-create. And I wrote another article specifically on that with Urs Yager, I'm sorry. And that was published in the Stanford Social Innovation Review around co-creating with the base of the pyramid. So that's one. And then within pilot, we have to understand what a pilot is. And a pilot is meant as a learning vehicle. It's not a project. A project is something you're running and you're trying to make as successful as possible, and you'll keep investing. A pilot is meant to allow you to learn, and it needs to be structured that way, both in terms of how managers are measured and also how we involve the base of the pyramid. If it's a pilot and there's risk, that risk has to be transferred to the enterprise and not the base of the pyramid. And if we want to measure success, it's not how well did the pilot do, it's how much did we learn from the pilot. And then when we think about scale, it's very important to really understand the capabilities needed to scale. Because to scale within a company, the idea is you're not going out in the market, acquiring something new each time you go to somewhere different. Rather, you're taking what's inside the company and moving it from place to place. And, of course, there are kind of physical assets and people, but what makes, the real logic for a large company to scale is that it can take capabilities from place to place. So in the book, I talk a lot about this capability of social embeddedness and why it's so important in a base of the pyramid enterprise and how managers need to nurture that so they can be sure that they can take that hard-earned capability from one market context to the next.
Professor, you argue that mutual value creation is at the heart of successful base of the pyramid impact enterprises, linking value for the poor with value for the firm. How should companies rethink the way they measure impact so that they capture changes in well-being, not just outputs or anecdotes?
That's another great question and an important lesson, I think, for enterprise leaders to be very attuned to. If we think about the reason businesses exist and we move beyond kind of the stakeholder shareholder maximization theory, which we could debate at a separate conversation, enterprises exist and are successful because they can create value. If they create value, the idea is that there's someone that would want to buy this, right? So there would be, they would then be able to capture some of the value from the customer, value creation, value capture. The idea is that the customer will value it enough so that they want to buy it, and there'll be something left over for the company. That something left over would become, assuming if revenues exceed costs, now we have profits, right? But the whole central thing is we've just built this model around value creation. Now, if we turn this around and we say you're impoverished and I alleviate your poverty, and I think we'll talk later about the multiple dimensions of poverty. What have I created for you? Well, I've created value. So what we need to do in this context is connect value creation with poverty alleviation. And then we see that the alignment of enterprises and this kind of social impact, poverty alleviation, is very close. We just have to change our thinking about value creation and think about it as alleviating poverty. And then we need to truly understand what poverty we've alleviated. And that has to do with for whom, how much, and what type.
Dr. Ted, the book emphasizes building a partnership ecosystem and introduces the partnership ecosystem framework. What does a healthy base of pyramid partnership ecosystem look like, and how can leaders decide which partners are truly scaling facilitators versus potential distractions?
Yeah, partnerships become critical in a low income context. They're critical for most enterprises. They're often thinking about partnerships with government, with associations, with other organizations. But for base of the pyramid, what's really important to think is that the market context they're entering is often underdeveloped, so that things we might expect to see in a higher income market may not be there. And that means to fill out the market, either the company has to do it themselves, which is costly, or they have to find a partner that will help them achieve their goals. An example could be awareness creation, that we might recognize that there's benefits of drinking clean water as it reduces disease, but it's difficult at times for people to understand that because, if you will, dirty water, as we'll say, isn't necessarily look any different from clean water. It just has pathogens in it. And of course, if people drink only clean water in a low income context, that doesn't mean they still won't get sick from other things. So building the connection between clean water and healthier lives is something that enterprises have to do and demonstrate that there's a value proposition to doing this. And that's costly. And if they do it, it's often a common good. That means the next enterprise can come behind them and use that same information. So it becomes a less attractive part of the business model. But there are a lot of development organizations that are really see the value of clean water and the importance of people being able to access and drink clean water. And they are often willing to co-invest with an enterprise to build awareness. And now you're talking about partnerships, right? So this is how you begin to think about what is it and that's what the ecosystem is designed is it's a 2x2 to get you to think about what are the things that you need to do in this context. What do you do already? Do you have any partners in place? And then what are the gaps? And those gaps are either something the enterprise has to do themselves or often something they could find a partner to do. And to do this, a really important part of this, which is hard for so many enterprises, and this is something I've seen in the Johannesburg airport and elsewhere, a proverb from Africa now, is if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And enterprises feel like they got to go fast, 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 but they don't get very far because they haven't built the partnership ecosystem they need. So this becomes a critical aspects of BoP enterprises. And in the book, I talk more about the type of person that they need to have on the team to do this and the type of framing they need to do to build out a successful partnership ecosystem. how do they need to think about partners and what they want so that they can build long-term sustaining relationships.
Professor, you highlight that poverty is multidimensional, evolving economic capability and relationship well-being. How does recognizing this multidimensionality change a way company redesign or design a business model, product or service for base of the pyramid customers?
Yeah. So what by thinking about poverty as multidimensional, it allows us to get a more robust sense of the full value proposition. So if we go back to microinsurance, one of the reasons farmers don't invest more in their crops is the risk of a significant disaster, such as, say, a drought or flooding, where they lose everything. So it makes sense each year to invest more in farm inputs if there is no major disaster. But they can't take that risk because if there's a major disaster, they lose everything and it's very hard to recover. So the idea of insurance is it not only does it, I mean, if you think about insurance, it costs farmers money to pay for this insurance, right? On average, farmers would much prefer never to have to use the insurance, right? It would be much better off if they didn't. So this is not microinsurance isn't necessarily directly generate towards increasing revenues, but what it does do is reduce risk. And farmers can now make better and safer investments, hybrid seeds if they want to, or at least better seeds and pesticides if they need, or fertilizer or whatever else they might need to improve their yield. And they're no longer faced with the threat of if there's a climate disaster, if there's a drought, we're going to be completely wiped out. Not only is our crop going to be lost, but we're going to have these bills to pay for the additional inputs. With the microinsurance, that risk goes away. It reduces, from a capability well-being, it reduces their stress, anxiety. From a financial well-being, it allows them to make further investments. And from a relationship well-being, it adds new players into the mix and allows, farmers to be more engaged in a broader community. So understanding the multidimensional nature of poverty allows you to move beyond, does it generate more income for somebody and say that there's much more to it than income generation. We need to think about all the dimensions of poverty and how it creates value.
Professor, drawing on research in roughly 80 countries, you have seen both powerful successes and painful failures. Is there a failure story that particularly reshaped your thinking? And what key lesson from that experience did you feel compelled to embed in this book?
Yeah, so yeah, it's been more than 100 countries, and the pattern repeats itself. That I think, and I have to be careful how I say this, but I think sometimes enterprise leaders come in with hubris. They think they know a lot. They've been well educated. They've often run businesses, successful businesses in other markets, and they come in thinking they know what to do. And I have seen those kinds of enterprises in agriculture, in healthcare, in energy, nutrition, pretty much all the fields where leaders are coming in thinking that they can help the base of the pyramid. We're here to help you, and we know best. And of course, if we're here to help someone and we know best, that creates already a power dynamic of, I'm the expert, you're the learner, I'm the teacher, you're the student, I'm the professional, you're the protege. And that's wrong, right? The base of the pyramid know just as much as we do. A colleague just said this to me, and I like it. Intelligence is spread equally across the world, but opportunity is not. The base of the pyramid are just as smart as we are. They know, when I say just as much as we do, I don't mean in the same sense that we have the same knowledge, but they know a lot about things we don't know. And we know a lot about things that they don't know. And we're not trying to create a top-down or a bottom-up model. We're trying to create something that neither could have done alone. And that gets back to the idea of co-creation. And without that, it becomes very difficult to be successful. And again, I've seen the same mistakes in not thinking about piloting, not understanding capabilities, being uncomfortable with partners, failing to understand the full value proposition, um, not recognizing how to build an enterprise from the inside. What does that look like for a base of the pyramid context? And these are the things that continually lead to failure. And we don't need to make those mistakes. It's hard enough as it is already. So the big idea is let's stop. Let's avoid the things that we know are going to lead most likely to failure. And how do we start with a better platform? And those examples are weaved throughout the book. But the idea is that, please take advantage of what we've learned already. Think of it, as just like you would when you go to business school. We use Porter's five forces or the four P's of marketing as ways to think about how to execute. None of those frameworks, are related to a particular industry or a particular market. They are standardized frameworks that can then be contextualized, can then be kind of constrained or focused on a particular enterprise. It allows us to strategize with full knowledge. And that's really the heart of the book is, please, I think as going back to a lot of leaders think nothing's been learned about this space. And that's just not the case. We have learned a lot. And if we want to be successful, we have to learn from what's already gone by and build from there.
Professor, I would like to conclude this episode with one last question. In the final chapter, we talk about making the promise a reality and the evolution of the base of the pyramid domain toward more innovation and collaboration. If you are advising a CEO or impact investor today, what one mindset shift and one concrete action would you urge them to take after reading the base of the pyramid promise?
Yeah. I think that the mindset is we have to understand our biases and how they influence our thinking. And everyone has biases. The world is a complicated place and we need to sort things out. You can look at a dog and make some judgment on it or, anything. So, there is that in place, but we have to understand that sometimes they're helpful, but sometimes they are incredibly limiting. And, I think when I work with enterprises, the thing that I think most about when we talk about this at the very beginning is I say, what are, for example, 3 words that you would use to describe the base of the pyramid? And our biases might lead us to say, well, they lack, this, or they don't have that, or or they need our help. But for me, the right 3 words to describe the base of the pyramid are partners, advisors, and colleagues. And if we adopt that kind of mindset, we change how we engage and we change the trajectory of the venture. And there are many other examples like that in the book. But the idea is that we have to be sure at the very beginning we're orienting ourselves correctly and being very careful of our mindsets. And, my advice, if they haven't read the book, I do hope they do. I think they'll find it valuable. Of course, I'm always happy to talk to enterprise leaders about this. But at the very key thing is you have to realize there are aspects of working in a base of the pyramid context that we are beginning to understand. And it's very important not to repeat those same mistakes. If you want to increase the likelihood of success, be sure that you've learned about what's gone before you.
Professor Ted, thank you once again for sharing your insight with us today. Your work on building businesses with impact and scale offers a powerful roadmap for leaders working in low-income markets, and we truly appreciate the depth and clarity you brought to this conversation. To our listeners, we hope this episode inspires you to rethink how business can partner with the base of the pyramid to create meaningful, lasting change. Thank you for joining us on Business Talk, and we look forward to having you with us again in our next episode. Thank you once again, Professor Ted London.
Deepak, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.